Platform wars, which as an individual independent developer will tell you, and at least this one will, it's both the best of times and the worst of times to be an independent developer. You have more access to more platforms than ever, and the business models on all of them are increasingly murky and difficult. Developing for them is both simultaneously easier than ever before and filled with lots of individual pratfalls. So the goal of the panel is to talk about these different platforms and from the eye of developers and people wanting to bring content to them, and look at what kind of advantages and opportunities they present for developers. So I've asked the panelists to kind of represent not only their own companies and platforms, but often the genre of platform that they're doing. So Chris, I was going to talk about PC, so we'll try to maybe, Chris is going to talk about consoles. So we'll try to fill in for that as best we can, and augmented reality. Peter is going to cover all of mobile, the entire spectrum, which is big.
They're small.
Yeah, that's right. And Nathaniel, I'll let everybody introduce themselves in a minute, is going to represent PC and virtual reality. So why don't we start with introductions, and we'll start off with you, Peter.
Sure. My name is Peter Heinrich, and my background is actually in game development. I started as a game developer in 1991 and worked on a wide variety of platforms, including consoles and PCs, and did some ports to the Amiga. Remember that machine? I even worked on 3DO. And then I moved into massively multiplayer online games on the internet around 94, 95, and released a game called Castle Infinity in 96, which was like the first big professional online MMO, I think. At least I claim that's true. And then moved, from there into mobile. So started mobile back in the feature phone days, probably around 99 or 2001. And throughout the course of my career, I've been working primarily for little companies, although I did do work for Dynamics, Sierra. I worked briefly at Monolith, and basically ran the gamut from the AAA studios down to a couple little startups that I founded with friends. And so I know what it's like to be on one side of the camp, and then also to work as an independent developer and try to make ends meet every day. So now I've been with Amazon, I guess, about 4 years, and my job as a developer evangelist there is to help other developers get their applications out, primarily on mobile devices, and help them be successful.
Great, thank you. Nathaniel.
I'm Nathaniel Blue. I work at Valve and predominantly work on the Steam team. And my background is kind of all over the map. I started started out as a Nintendo kid, Game Boy kid, then kind of moved into all the sort of consoles all through the gamut, and then started out kind of in the music industry, and then kind of moved into advertising, and then eventually ended up at Valve. So kind of a random background, but my focus is mostly on tools and educating developers on sort of how to develop for the platform, and then also work a little bit on things like Steam machines and the controller and stuff like that.
Great, thanks. My name is Jordan Weisman. I've been making games for a really long time, and big companies and small companies, and currently have a small development team here in town called Harebrained Schemes, which is published on both these people's platforms. So let's maybe kick off and talk about Chris, since he's not here, and talk about consoles for a little bit, and kind of perspectives of what's happening in the console space. From an outside perspective, it seems that the penetration rates we've seen over the first couple years of the platform don't seem to be at quite the rate we saw on previous generations. Do you think this represents any kind of narrowing of demographic that the consoles apply to?
I don't think any of us really know. I think the typical launch of console was pretty like, if you compared it to Xbox 360, Xbox One, they were fairly similar in the beginning, slow adoption rate, but it's really hard to tell like if that means a trend in the future or not. I think we'd be kind of crazy to think that we would know like that we would know the future of consoles. I can say that there's more and more innovative content coming to consoles, more and more multiplayer games, and it seems like the update issues of yesteryear, where you couldn't update when you want, are kind of going away. So, I mean, as far as a developer goes, it seems like the trend is good as far as where they're moving, but to actually predict their future, I couldn't do that. I wish I could.
Let's talk about mobile, which is kind of the inverse. I mean, mobile is, ubiquitous. Is there any kind of observations in terms of where the money in gaming is? Is that from a subset of the audience, and if so, identifiable subsets?
Well, it'd be really tempting to say we make most of our money from this specific demographic. Everybody, that the group of males between 18 to 26 are generating all the revenue. And I don't think we can actually say that. I think what we can say is that the revenue is being generated by the people who are really engaged with their games. And so the key is maybe not to target, specific demographic per se, but to think about how you can make your game more engaging. And, if you can do that for the 18 to 26-year-olds, that's great, but really you want to try to make it apply to as broad a demographic as possible.
And in terms of engagement, different platforms have really different kinds of measures of success for engagement, just measured and even just looked at in terms of time, right? And a really engaging game on mobile would be different from a PC experience to a console experience. What kind of, measures of success, or what kind of timeframes are appropriate to design around for each of those platforms?
Well, for mobile, it's actually really fascinating. I mean, we have Amazon, of course, we're very metrics driven, so we've got lots and lots of data, mountains of data that we'd really be remiss if we didn't process. And what it's telling us is that for mobile in particular, the sweet spot seems to be between 3 and 5 sessions per day, and each of those sessions is between 3 and 7 minutes. So you think about a typical game where you're trying to engage somebody. I'm going to assume, for instance, on a PC or console game, you're trying to engage someone for 60 minutes or more at a time. With a mobile game, you're really trying to get your player to come back. And so sometimes that means timed releases, something that happens, public events that are happening throughout the day. Sometimes that means sending updates and actually notifying them of new features on a regular basis. Sometimes directly contacting the devices. You can actually target specific devices and say, hey, we notice you haven't achieved this achievement or achieved this objective, but all you really need to do is kill 2 more gruffs and you're going to get that extra crystal. So that's the kind of thing you can do to bring your players back and keep them engaged throughout the day.
On Steam and PC games, what kind of engagement windows and periodicity of repeat play are you seeing?
I'm not sure exactly on the engagement window. I think engagement is important, but I don't know. I don't know that there's a specific mold that fits all games.
Mm-hmm.
But I can say that engaging with your community is super important. But every game kind of has its own unique community. I mean, one of the things that I'll tell developers is, when you're developing a game, I'll give them a bunch of advice, and at the end of it I'll say, and don't trust me or anybody else, because the truth is like your game is unique to you and to your community, and you're part of it. So engagement's important, but it's important in every different shape and form. So every game is different. In PC, we're seeing lots of PC games that, there's turn-based games that actually key off with mobile games that are connected. There's plans for ones that connect to consoles and to PC and to mobile. And so, and that's just it's kind of an export of whatever type of game that is. Does that make sense, right? Like that makes sense in a card game or a game that you play with a friend that's turn-based, but it doesn't make sense in an RPG, a first, single-player RPG. So it all really depends on the type of game. I can say that the more people playing your game, we do see this trend. The more people playing a game, the better the sales of the game, right? So things like free weekends, things like figuring out smart promotions of getting more people in playing games, especially around an event, you can actually correlate that right into also revenue growth. So we've even tested this with giving away free games. Like we've given away Left 4 Dead 2 for free no strings attached for 24 hours, millions and millions of copies, and then we've just watched like this tail of sales just like come right out of that. And you'd think, oh, economics says you just put a bunch of units out, you're going to see your sales decline, and we saw completely the opposite. Like more players equaled more purchasers. So it doesn't mean you should just constantly give out your free game. It's about making an event around it, but it does work really well. So again, that ties into engagement. More people playing, talking to their friends about the game, more people are coming into the game and willing to pay for it.
Yeah, I'd mentioned that Amazon has a free app of the day program that we run, and it's really strange. We've seen this strange behavior that you described where we'll release a game and it'll be available and downloaded 100,000 times, and then we'll see that we'll hear from the participants that their games are actually doing better on Google Play as well and on iOS, even though they're not free there, but simply the momentum, I guess, of making their game available to 100,000 people all at once or more gives them a lift everywhere.
And that actually brings up a good point. Running different events and sales on different, like if you're selling in multiple different places, sort of staggering those at different times is actually a pretty interesting thing to do, because you actually do oftentimes see halo effects on other platforms when you run a promotion or some sort of an event somewhere, and just keeping in mind that your community is sort of connected in this weird way. Even if they don't play on the same multiplayer servers, for instance, they're still connected. There's still this buzz that goes on, and so having events in different spaces, I don't think, for instance, sales-wise, you should feel like I have to run a promotion here and run it everywhere at the exact same time. Actually having an event in different spaces is actually really healthy.
Yeah, no, we've seen that certainly even in our sales. When we run a sale on Steam, we'll see our iOS and Android sales go up. Yeah. Similarly, and it just more energy in the environment does bleed across platform walls. Absolutely. One of the things that, interestingly, uniquely, one of the two of the few curated platforms are represented here, Steam and Amazon's Androids. A lot of mobile is completely uncurated and wide open, which causes a real problem in terms of being able to get awareness. And there's so many apps out there. How do you get any awareness for yours? Can you guys talk about awareness on your platforms and on others, and what tools you've seen or techniques you've seen success for developers? And because yours is curated, how does one get their title through your curation and onto the and onto the marketplace?
Yeah, so more and more, at Steam, we're trying really hard to get out of the curation space as much as we can. It's kind of the opposite of our goal, is to be a curator or a knob turner or that's actually completely opposite to Apple, which the focus is more around curated and curators. We're kind of the opposite in that we would much rather take a data-driven approach and then let sort of the system work. That's something you probably saw in the discoverability update we did not too long ago. That was a pretty big effort. We spent it was about a year and a half discussing it, and then a good 6 months executing it. And the whole plan there was kind of to think of the ways that we used to do a lot of test and learn. So we would try a game out, promote it, and then we'd look at okay, what data do we have about sales and about players and reviews on this game, and then promote it, and then for a certain amount of time, see what happens, then go take a different game with a different set of data, promote it, and then kind of see. And then we through that, we learned when was the right time to promote certain types of games and things. And we kind of figured out a way to have our store do that. So most of the curation right now on Steam is actually driven by it's algorithmic, and it looks at things like reviews, it looks at things like sales, it looks at things like release date, and it decides based on some criteria how it's going to promote the games. One thing we always do is we sample the game. So you probably noticed this when your game launched, it's sampled on the front page for a certain amount of time, and the store is actually thinking about okay, what data did I learn from when I sampled it, comparing it to other games and things, and then it decides, do I promote it more? Do I promote it to this type of user? And so it's just sort of more and more becoming more and more targeted, so that we can spread out the views across many games and hopefully be as efficient as possible. One thing it is designed to do is if there's a game with lots of bad reviews, or it's got a very negative trend, lots of reports, it's going to on purpose pull that game back, right? Because that means this isn't the time to promote this game. It may get better, which we've seen a bunch in early access. We've seen games go from we've seen 25% swings in review scores, for instance, where a game is like mixed or even negative reviews, and then over time they've developed that game into actually a mostly positive reviewed game before it launches. And that's really healthy, but what isn't healthy is if we put a bunch of marketing behind it early on when it's mixed or it's negative, because we're just doing you a disservice of showing your game off. So what we do is, in that case, the store is smart enough to say, okay, I'm not going to promote this game, and I'm going to wait, and then at a certain point, when the review score changes, or we're going into release, then I'm going to push promotion around it. And we're doing more and more things, tools like front page visibility rounds. So when you do a big update to your game, you can push your game to the front page and actually get a certain amount of views and impressions. So, and then if it's getting a lot of interest, it'll actually stay up there. So we've seen some updates will stay on the front page for 4 days. It'll just sit there and get lots of views, and lots of people will be engaging with this game because of a big update. So more and more, we're trying to find more tools to let developers push their game to the front page, and then be smart about how we keep them there or not. So we're actually kind of trying to go the other way, just because we know we make a lot of mistakes. We used to look back at it and go like, why did we promote that game for like 3 days? It's like someone's like, oh, I forgot to push the button to pull it down. And like it literally was that, and it was like, oh great, so now we just ran this game that was kind of like taking up space when we could have ran this other game. So that's kind of our focus, is actually getting as far out of that as we can. We'll still run deals, special daily deals and weekend deals and things like that, but generally the rest of it, we're trying to keep it as hands-off as possible. And at some point we might be able to figure out a way to do that in a smarter way, the weekend deals.
How about getting on the platform altogether?
What's that?
Getting onto the platform altogether?
So currently, the process of getting the platform is through Greenlight. Slowly over time, we've been sort of bringing that bar down. I think most people probably know, like, it used to be about 20,000 votes to get in through Greenlight, positive votes, and now it's moved down to around 2,000. So it's shifted down. But what it does do is it gives us some data around, do people think this game's malicious? Do people think this game is it questionable? Is it something we should be prepared for, like that people are really upset about the content or something? And then it also helps people get some data around, is their game, what's their marketing like? What do people think about it? What do they wish it had that maybe it doesn't? So it's a feedback loop as well. So currently the plan right now is to continue with Greenlight. There may be a change at some point, but it's been improving more and more. And something that we just added recently, this is about a week ago, that's pretty cool, is when your game is in Greenlight, or let's say it's in a coming soon state, people can follow your game and they can add it to their wish list. And then what we can do is when the game goes to launch, we can actually send an email, a targeted email, to every single customer that engaged with that game that said, hey, I'm interested in this game, so that they know when it launches. Because a lot of people are like, they go find games and they just kind of tag them, and then there was no feedback to them. So that's a new way that we've been trying to increase the exposure for those games when they come over.
Peter, let's talk about Amazon.
Right. So Amazon, we are curated, and I think I don't know if we're trying to get out of that business or not. We definitely are trying to streamline that as much as possible, so that the time between pushing the button to submit or publish and the time it actually goes live is getting shorter and shorter. And actually, quite a large part of the process is completely automated. So, often a real person won't have to review something when it gets published. It'll just go through some automated tests and then only draw someone's attention if something gets flagged. And we also try to provide tools on our developer portal to make it easy for people to drag and drop their APK, their executable right on the website, and we'll actually take that as an upload and run it in the background and run a whole bunch of static tests. We'll also run it on a fleet of actual devices. So we've got a warehouse someplace with tablets and phones plugged in, and we actually run the application on those devices and then report back to the user, usually within about 90 seconds, whether or not the static analysis has turned up anything. And then usually within about 6 hours, we can give them screenshots and CPU logs and memory logs from the actual devices as well. So we're trying to make it easier for them to launch, hands off, push a button, and you're done. And of course, a lot of our outreach and education is just making it clear that we are based on Android, and so if you've got an existing application on Google Play, chances are about 3 out of 4 apps just work, without any changes. So of course, we're trying to convince people that they need to launch on our platform because it's super simple and it's very high ROI because you hardly have to make any changes. So getting on our platform is pretty easy and getting easier.
Let's talk about business models for developers and what you see on your platforms for how people can charge for their games. What models are you seeing be successful? What opportunities do you see 6 months, a year out for people to be developing towards?
I think it really depends on the game. Again, there are tons of different models. I mean, the great thing is there's so much flexibility and opportunity in sort of how you want to sell your game. Like it could be free. It could be an early access with some sort of gate that eventually goes away. It could be a mixture of paid up front and items in game. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can decide that how you want to sell your game. That it's really flexible, and there isn't necessarily a way that's the way or the way that's working. There are some new things, like for instance, the Steam economy has become pretty big, and games can now integrate. We have now an item server, a Steam item server that you can use. That's part of our tools. We host the item server, and basically it connects you into gifting into the Steam economy, and it allows people to basically have backpacks within Steam. But it's like a turnkey system that works really smooth, as well as it works with Workshop, so you can ingest from Workshop into the item server into your game. So we've been trying to work more on tools just to let people have more flexible ways to interact with their customers. I think the big advice I would say is just don't make your goal revenue extraction too early. That's like one of the biggest mistakes we see with free-to-play games, with any game that has in-game transactions. We'll see that if revenue extraction is like your early goal, it oftentimes makes you make a lot of bad decisions. It should be about the game being really fun, and then testing and learning like what does my community want to pay for, and then bringing those things in slowly over time and learning as you go, and being willing to make mistakes. But one of the simple things that on our game teams that we think about is the regret test. So thinking about ahead, like if I were to buy this item, if I was in my community, what's the likelihood that there might be regret? And this could come down to even the way it was messaged to the person. Not even, maybe it's really valuable, but you messaged it a little wrong. And so we think about that and go, if there's any likelihood that there's going to be regret, then we just change course and we try to either add more value to the content, think about a new way to talk about it, and then again, there's times where you make mistakes and you add more content, or you just scrap what you were doing, but thinking about that from the user perspective at all times is really important, because if you have an item that people see as valuable, and especially if it has positive externalities, like I bought this thing and in game I can affect others positively. For example, I bought a really cool shiny armor set, and it means that anyone that I'm matchmaking with can wear that armor set too. Like that's a big win, right? Because you've just taken away a bunch of the potential regret of that purchase because they can share it with others. And it's also advertising of that item, right? So I would say the key things are, don't be super focused on revenue extraction, think about the regret test, look for positive externalities, and then just use the tools that you have at your disposal to sort of tweak the way that you want your game to work. But there definitely isn't any sort of trend I see that's more popular than others, because I mean, even if you look at Valve's games, Counter-Strike has a totally different monetization structure than Dota, than does TF2, and we've tried to say, hey, we're going to try this thing that was awesome in TF2 on Dota, and it fails, and we go, whoa, that's crazy. We thought it was like done, and we thought that was great. It was super baked, and you're like, no, actually, it didn't work. It's a totally different community, and so I would say be careful not to project any sort of strategy around monetization to another game. To just be cautious about that.
So our experience at Amazon has been that the more people play your game, the more you're going to make, right? It's just straightforward. again, it kind of goes back to engagement. So I like what you said about not trying to monetize too early. I mean, what we found is that typically people have a price sensitivity that declines over time. So if I'm willing to, I download your free-to-play game and you're going to sell me some crystal pack for 99 cents, I might be willing to pay that on the first day, but I might not be willing to pay for the $4.99 pack right away. But over time, that sensitivity actually decreases quite a bit. And so even 30 days later, I'm going to spend maybe 60% more on each transaction than I would have right away. So the longer you can keep your player in the game or engaged with the game, the more money you'll make in the long run. In fact, what we've seen typically is that you make about 75% of all your revenue after the first week. So you think about a lot of mobile games that you play or you try, people download it, they try it for a little bit, and then it's gone, right? You never play it again, or you uninstall it within 3 days. If you're in that category as a game developer, you're really missing out because there's this mountain of long tail revenue that you make after the first week. And in fact, you think about your most engaged, the very most engaged customers that you have, people have all sorts of names for them. I just call them really engaged customers. They, on our platform, they account for about 30% of all the revenue. And this is 1% of the customers, the overall customers. They're accounting for 30% of the revenue. So it's all about, again, going back to the engagement, and it's really, as you said, independent of game type. It's however you get the players of your game super excited about it. So if you're a match 3 game, maybe you're trying to, keep them in the game 5 minutes at a time, 10 times a day. Whereas if you're a racing game, maybe you just want to have them in there for 35 minutes, for a daily race. It's really independent of the game type. You have to know your customer well enough to get them super excited about staying in and playing over the long term.
Nathan, on Steam, the Steam sale is such a powerful driver and offers, such deep discounts on titles. It seems that there could be a bit of a race to the bottom and an incentive for players to wait, knowing eventually the titles are going to come dramatically down in price. Do you think there's an ongoing downward price pressure that's taking place on Steam?
We haven't seen that. The data suggests that actually full price games are actually still a huge chunk of the pie, if not growing. We're actually seeing more of a trend of full price titles growing. A good example is if you go look at our top 10 sellers, you'll see like full priced early access games almost always in the top 10 sellers, which is kind of mind blowing in itself because it's an unfinished game, but it's really fun, right? And those are at full price almost always when you see them there. But we haven't seen any race to the bottom. We think that developers should choose their price, and they should also choose when they run sales. But then we put safeguards in place to make sure that hopefully they don't make a poor decision that we know we have high predictability that it's a poor decision. For example, dropping your price the first week of your game launch, like from $10 to $2.99. That's going to throw off an alert when the price change comes into us because we're going to go, well, there must be, unless there's a really good reason to do this, it's generally a bad idea to be just totally focused on revenue and dropping your price out of fear or something because you're upsetting your early customers. So we developers choose their price, but we actually look for things that are out of line, that we think are out of line. And another example is we allow developers to run a sale on their game. They can put it as part of a week-long deal, or they can just run a standalone sale. But there's an 8-week cooldown. So because a lot of the data that we have gathered shows that you don't want to run your sales too close, so we just build that in. So don't run your sale too close. Well, you can't. The tool doesn't let you. Now, you can get hold of us if you have some great reason, like, hey, there's a YouTuber doing something, and we're doing this cool event, and we're like, oh, totally, of course, let's do that. But that way, folks aren't making mistakes. Again, being super focused on revenue extraction over a long tail of the game. So, but we haven't seen any data to suggest that the unit, like we actually look on a monthly basis at like what's our unit cost per transaction, like on average, and there's no trend to show that that's declining, and that's been like steady over many years.
What are you seeing as the lifetime average price over a SKU for a game as a percentage of the initial sales price?
The lifetime average price.
Yeah. So in other words, if you look at over the lifetime of the product, and taking into account its full price and its eventual sales, what was the average price across all of it?
It's a mix. It's a mix depending on the game, right? So some games have super long tails or sell really well at full price, right? Because they're a great value. So like that game might lower its price. Its price drop might be 12 months from launch, where maybe a standard AAA game would be 6 months. It just depends. But over time, I think when you get into like year 2, I mean, we'll oftentimes see 30 to 50% of revenue from a game be on some sort of price discount. But there isn't any sort of, like, I can't say that's a certain percentage off, because sometimes the tools are designed to let people test and learn. So sometimes people find like their best price point is 30% off, and others find it's 75. It just really depends on the life of the game, where it's at, what updates have happened to it, what events are going around that game. So it kind of fluctuates, but generally in the first year, we're seeing more full price sales than discounted, at least total revenue.
And Peter, I know one of the early issues with Amazon was price control, and who controlled the price of the games being put up on the marketplace. What's the current situation on that?
So, right, I won't discuss all ancient history.
Don't do ancient history. Just
I'll take the fifth.
Look forward from here.
Okay. Well, we do have a promotions console, which is available from the developer portal, and it allows you to set the price, change sales. You can also actually offer sales on in-app purchase items as well, so you have full control over all the different items. We still take a cut, but you can adjust that number. But you can adjust your own price.
And within the context of your platforms and larger looking at for what experience you can for console and other mobile, what are the best tools that a developer can use to gain awareness for their platform? Either in the context of your network, things like promotions or so on, or outside of the contents of your network.
Well, I can't remember who said it, but I always thought it was a great quote, which was, marketing is the price of being unremarkable, and that's a lot of motivation behind my speaking engagements actually among developers, is explaining, or at least making people aware that just because you come up with the next great sponge and you get it into your local corner store, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to be flocking to the store to buy your sponge, right? And we have the same problem in retail in games that people have been having in retail for hundreds of years, which is you have to be remarkable in order to draw attention, or you have to be focused on a very specific customer. And so, I would say, number one, even before you start looking for the silver bullet on any platform and figure out how to get in the top 10 list or that top 10 list, you should just make sure your basic marketing ducks are in a row. And that, these are simple things as far as mobile goes. You want to make sure that your description is really descriptive and it's not, using somebody else's title, or you're not trying to be deceptive. You want to make sure all your art is the very best art that you can make it for the store, because a lot of people make their initial decision on whether they're going to download strictly on the icon, right? So, if you can't even get your app on the device, then there's no way you're going to be successful. So there are just simple things like that you need to pay attention to. And then, Amazon kind of generally has been telling people that what we see really successful game developers doing is trying to convert their ordinary players, the people who are, just the run-of-the-mill people downloading their apps, into actual fans, right? There's a big difference between a fan base for something like football, and something like foosball. I love foosball, but you probably don't know all the different national foosball players, and you probably don't have your favorite foosball team's jersey in your cupboard, right, or in your closet, right? So you think about a fan base that actually is composed of influencers and advocates for your game, and if you can do things to appeal to them, then you're going to have much better success just driving word of mouth about your game. And that's what we see the super successful games doing right now, is they're kind of working outside the box. They're trying new marketing strategies around, turning these regular players into advocates and influencers.
I liked what the guys said from Darkest Dungeon earlier about unload your clip. I think that's pretty right on. It's one of my points that I was going to say on this topic was just market your game early, start early, and like be totally fine with like just totally unloading your clip many times. Because you want to get people to know about your game. You want to make sure that you can communicate it well, that like you can tell people why your game is unique, and you can talk about it in a way that that people can understand quickly. And we'll even challenge each other at Valve about either a game or a feature. We're like, okay, give me what's the one sentence? Like, tell me what this is right now. Because, you can get really too close to something and you're like, how do I explain? You think of it in all these different ways, but you're not thinking about like the really concise description that really explains why your game is unique. Some other things I had wrote down were about your marketing materials and tweaks, and you need to have your marketing materials need to be effective. So tweaking those and testing those early is really beneficial. So using things like Google Analytics and testing, in different. You could do it in Greenlight, you can do it in blogs, lots of different ways. But actually testing, like, is this capsule, for example, is this art effective to translate something about my game, and does it attract people to come and check out more about my game? And one thing that I see happen a lot is developers will think, if I just put a ton of text on my art, it's going to attract people and be like, free ship weekend and Alpha 2.0 and all these things, and they end up muddying. It's like kind of advertising 101, just like way too much information. Like you just threw out all this information to people. And you have to realize, like, people just have this really quick attention. Like in mobile, they have it all over the internet. We've been trained to just like our attention spans just getting shorter and shorter. So it's about like super effective, super, attractive and effective marketing that can just like, you want people to actually go, oh, what is this? And click into it and start to digest what your game is about. So I would say, keep things simple, get hands-on feedback from customers early. So if you can, have a closed beta. Make sure it's not just your friends, because your friends are probably the worst people to give you feedback. Get some people that are that like games like you make, playing it. And I think something that was really interesting is Alexander Bruce, who did Antichamber, he said something like, it takes tens of millions of views to translate to 100,000 sales. And he's pretty right on it. You really do need to market your game and figure out why it is unique and where you should be, where your community is, and talk to them. And you can't, the platform can't do it for you. We see this like all the time. Like we do have a basic amount of views, and we try to be as generous as we can that we give games, but Steam on its own is not going to sell your game. That's for sure. And some people come with that thought, like, I have this great game, I haven't talked to anyone about it, and Steam's just going to sell it. It's just going to make so much money tomorrow. And I've
already got the Ferrari on order.
Sadly, it's just not true. It just isn't true, and that won't work on any platform. It's important to treat it like a business, have a business plan, be thinking about like, how are we going to talk about this? And if you're not great at marketing, getting some friends. I bet you have friends that are great at advertising and marketing, and talk to them about like, hey, can you help me? Can you design a capsule for me? Can you help me figure out how I'm going to talk to my community? And then things can happen, like interesting things happen. We come in every day and we'll be surprised. We'll look at the store and go, what is this game in the top 10 sellers? And oftentimes, because of the nature of our tools, we've never met these people. And the game, I would say 50% of the time, it's in early access and it's some really cool concept. But there's a common thread amongst these games. They have a unique game. It's really fun. And most of these guys are really tied into their community, have been thinking about how they're going to talk about their game. And then they've done this groundwork to get people to know about it before it comes out. And again, they're just like they were saying, they're unloading their clip early, and they're doing it over and over, and it's just paying off because they've done a lot of testing before they put it up. And then at that point, the nice thing is our store is going to kick in and start doing extra things to help push that game a bit more. But initially, oftentimes there's like literally nothing that we do, and that game has a built-in community as it comes in.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a really good point, because, Twitch, if you're familiar with Twitch TV, this is a really great tool that you can use. And we've seen some indie developers just do amazing things on Twitch TV. You think about like Flambeer, they did Luftrauser, which was a great game. Now they're working on Nuclear Throne, and they're basically live coding this on Twitch, and they've got 8,000 subscribers. They've got like 8 million views on this channel before they've even launched the game, right? So they can be in there, they're working on something, and they've got these subscribers who are totally invested in the game. They're super excited about it. They're communicating with the developers as they're working, like, hey, you should that guy needs more muscles, and like, oh, okay, I'll program that in. So, oh yeah, that's much better. It's so cool, because then when they do launch the game, of course, all those early, the VIP, basically, the VIP users who got in early and were participating are super excited. They're the ones who go out and, again, become these advocates or these influencers who are telling all their friends about it. They're explaining, like, oh yeah, this is the game that I was telling you about. I've been totally, I've been online with these guys while they were making it. Here's the T-shirt I got. Yeah, I can totally get you one. And those are the kinds of stories that you hear make people really successful, right? And it's exactly what you're saying, where before the game is even released, there's this huge community that's just really amped up and jazzed to see it succeed. So. Yeah.
Again, it's an early feedback loop. I mean, that's the important part, right? He's learning about, should I make his muscles stronger? It's really valuable to get an early feedback loop, because anybody designing a game in a vacuum, your chance of success is so small. You really need others to chime in. There are times where someone just nails it and they had no clue, and most of the time they had no clue it was going to happen, nor did they want it to happen. They made the game for themselves. They have some really unique product, but most of the time it's very community driven. And game development's just becoming the lines are blurring between like indie produced games and what we used to consider a AAA retail game. Like they're just like, it's totally blurred at this point. And even the development cycle of games, there isn't any sort of funding, develop this way, monetize this way, ship that just works. It's just all over the place. And the fortunate thing is the way that platforms are becoming more and more, that games are being treated the same, whether they're come from some huge publisher or they come from a two-man team. Stores are starting to become more and more just giving them the same treatment if customers are interested in them. And so, I know Amazon does a great job of this, and Steam is designed completely this way, that, we don't say, this publisher gets this sort of marketing and, it's exclusive to them. It's always an even field where anyone can get that same treatment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I think about like the first little company that I started, I think was in '97, and there were 4 of us in a room, and we were working on these little, I guess you'd call them casual games now. And that year there were, I think, 2,700 games that were released. And this is 1997, so this is before things really took off anyway, right? And now the Amazon App Store, we see thousands of games submitted every week. And you think about our process, our chances of success in '97 were actually probably greater than they would be now if you just kind of throw it out there into the ether and expect something to happen, right? It's really all in your own hands to make it happen and get out there in front of people.
Well, great. We got more questions here, but we're also running out of time, and I want to open it up for questions from the audience. With what time we have left, any questions out there? Brave souls? Okay. Well, we'll get one more in two. Yes, one in the back there.
On the visibility rounds and things, can you talk about any of the other things that are sort of measured? Like you indicated, if it's performing well, and then it can go past the initial burst. Imagine click-throughs, but are there other engagements that you're kind of measuring there in terms of?
It's a mixture of things for each spot and each type, and it's also changing over time. We're like tweaking it to make it as effective as possible. And when I say that, I actually mean as effective as possible for the title. Like we're really focused on the game doing well when it chooses to do some function, right? Versus just making more money. That's not the focus. So you have front page visibility rounds, and I don't know if you knew this, but you can there's a little game to it. Like if you are getting a lot of conversions, like if you're getting more than the average click-throughs on that, it will actually give you a bonus. So you'll actually see a little bonus one show up, and that's sort of, it can continue. So if you're doing, and this is what I'll tell people, like, you should actually experiment with different capsule art when you're doing some of these, because then you can A/B test and say like, hey, when we did our last update and we used this capsule art, we had this percentage of click-through, and we did the next one, oh wow, we got so much better. Oh, and we got a bonus too. Like, you can start playing with like, you know, those sorts of things. That's one piece of it. The other is when you guys go from early access to launch, we just put out a new feature where we can push emails to anyone who put it on their wish list. And so since the discoverability update, we've got about, it's over 2 times as many wish lists on an average game. So more and more people are interacting with the queue and adding games to their wish list and just using it as a tool. And before, you used to only get a notification if it was on sale. And we were like, that's not the right time we should always be promoting a game. We should be promoting when it comes out, when it launches. So that's been really, really helpful in the last few weeks since that's been out. We've seen a big change. At least developers have said, wow, we've really seen this really great day one because of this communication. There's, you know, week-long deals is another way that, you know, that developers can push to the store and push to the front of the store. And then the other is just the community tags your game, right, with different tags. And then based on that and people's playing behavior, if they don't own your game but they play a lot of games like your game, then there's a high likelihood it's going to pop up to them. And that we're looking there at things like reviews. We're looking at things like sales. We're looking at things like age of the title since its last release date. There's a few other pieces too we're looking at, but and it is, like I said, it's changing a little bit, but we're trying to optimize it that it would, you know, promote a game to someone who likes a certain type of game that the community has, a node that the community has created, and then showing that game to those folks right in the place that you would see, you know, like a curated promotion, like a main capsule rotation. So, did that answer all your questions?
Yeah, I'm back.
The wishlist emails, is that automatic or do we have to request that?
It's becoming automatic. So right now it's a tool where you don't need to request it, but it's a tool where we're actually pushing buttons right now, just making sure there's no bugs and we don't upset anybody. And that is becoming automatic. So currently it sort of is automatic, but I'm actually, like, there's a few of us actually hitting send each day, but eventually it will be completely automatic. So any game that's going from coming soon, pre-purchase, or early access to launch, we'll get that on launch day.
Right? Any other question?
Maybe you don't know the answer to this, but I'll ask anyway. Developers today, are they developing what they know of what the market wants? And the idea of, if I'm a developer and say, hey, I'm going to develop a game, but I know PC and DirectX, I'm going to do a PC version. Or they say, I'm going to develop a game, that Android thing's a pretty big market, I'll develop for Android first. So which comes first? Is it both the skills that they have, or is it based on the market analysis that's deciding how they're going to go?
Well, I would say that it's the market for the most part, because what I see in mobile is that there's this amazing democratization, right? I mean, you see so many more people developing games, just developing in general, but developing games specifically, and I think the reason they're doing that is because they are excited by the technology that's available. So they look out and they say, wow, you know, I've got this device and it's super simple for me to realize this idea. I can reify something in Unity in, you know, 2 hours and have it on my phone. So that's what I'm going to do. And I think a lot of people are, it's kind of like, you know, the Great American Novel. It's the Great American Game. Everybody has this great idea for a game, and now they've got the technology where they can actually, you know, realize it pretty easily. And they're not coming from it from, you know, from a heavily computer science background or development background where they're going, oh, I have these very specific technologies that I'm trying to utilize. It's more, I'm just trying to get this idea, you know, into my real life.
So you mentioned Unity, which is kind of a cross-platform development tool, in which case they're using that and then they're going for the market based on the size of the market that is.
Yeah, but it's a bit of a myth that just because you have a tool that's cross-platform, you can instantly push a button and it's on every platform. There's a fair amount of work and optimization and screen aspect ratios and UI changes and the entire user experience changes that have to go between the wide variety of platforms we've been talking about today.
Yeah, I'm just looking back at the past. Used to be PC development houses and Mac development houses, and they were kind of very separate entities.
Yeah, no, I think that's mostly gone away.
Yeah, it's a really good time to be a developer. I mean, the engines are so powerful, and the ability to target multiple platforms is there. Like you can, right? But it's like you said, it's not a push a button and it just happens. But it's getting better and better. I mean, you guys have probably seen the information about Vulkan that has come out. But I mean, an ability to sort of that like GPU manufacturers can just target one target, and developers can just push out to this, and they can hit like Mac, Linux, PC, like all in one go, nice and simple, and not have to deal with the pains of OpenGL versus DirectX and things. And that's just one of things that's going to happen. I think there's just more and more of this, simplifying sort of the target, and then the tools just becoming more and more powerful. So, but I would say I think people probably do target one platform initially a lot of times, like at least this is my core platform. But then I think oftentimes they're surprised, like Goat Simulator is a good example, right? They wrote it as a joke, and they wrote it for PC players, like they're gonna laugh, this is really funny, and it was just sort of a fun side little like week-long project. And then it's been most successful on mobile. And like they didn't know that, but it's like then now when you look back and you're like, of course, mobile, this game's awesome on mobile. But so it was kind of a happy mistake. Well, the game was a happy mistake, but then actually mobile being so successful is another sort of happy mistake. But the engine they used, they had the ability to sort of expand it. And they're like, oh, PC players like this, let's start expanding.
I think part of the key is making sure that it's on the devices that your audience is on, right? So if you've established this relationship with people, and you want to get your game into their hands, make sure you're actually releasing to the platform that they use.
Yeah.
Yes?
So with the kind of the difference between the big production values and these now with these new smaller production value games, do you guys have any analytics against? It's just so much of it is luck. A great example, right? That you have some success with the game, right? Do you guys have any kind of analytics that have been telling you kind of what the chances are? Like you said, ROI. What are the chances of establishing this metric of making your money back?
Well,
on game development?
I think, just from what Peter was saying, no time in history have more games been failing per day than now. Right? I mean, just because you have more games being produced by many, many orders of magnitude, and you have so much less of a chance of gaining exposure, holding audience attention. It is both, the best of times and the worst of times. You've got by far the most powerful tools we've ever had available at the lowest costs, and the ability to reach so many potential audience members at lowest cost. But you're also competing with everybody else who's taking advantage of that. So I think it's a giant kind of have and have-nots kind of model.
Games is kind of I worked in part of games long ago, and it was before some of the consumer stuff, and they were just slopping product onto the shelf, right? And point out, you had to do you had to pass through a market test, which is gone before they built a bunch of games. Literally the size of games with all these analytics, which we didn't point out, by the way, with the there's so much more afforded to the game development team.
Oh, yeah.
Right? To get the smallest little MVP out there and actually start small.
Absolutely.
So I'm wondering how much of the opportunity there is there to just kind of take a different stab at success. And it's just not about just my dream game, but it's about how do I get to my first.
Well, I've got some great numbers that show Amazon is at the top of the game there. I mean, I can actually tell you, so for instance, we have this very specific number called the app poverty line that we set at $500 a month, right? And we just figure, some percentage of our developers are always going to be below this app poverty line. And, the research that we've seen is that, if I can shill for Amazon for a minute, if you compare like iOS, it's about 40% of developers are below that number. And on Google Play, it's slightly higher. I think it's like 55% or somewhere in there. And at Amazon, 60% of the people who develop are actually above that number. So, I mean, that's one metric that we look at. We actually are trying to keep track of how many people are in a position where they could actually make a living doing what they want to do and release games on our platform.
But
Metric that's awesome, the poverty line.
The app poverty line.
That's pretty good. I think I think my point there would be just to build a game that you can afford. So if people are building games that they can't afford, or that like it doesn't have to be feature rich and super, if your scope is so big that you need so much money to create it that you can't afford to get there with investment or Kickstarter or things like that, then you're kind of in a bad spot, because you're most likely going to make poor decisions around how you monetize and things like that on trying to make money too quickly. So there's tons of games that are made with shoestring budgets that are just amazingly fun. And so if your focus is make a really fun game, engage a community, and build a game that you can afford, which usually means thinking like at the very beginning back to like, what's my business plan and what's my marketing plan and can I pull this off? If you start there, then you're in a good place. You're actually in a better place than a lot of indie game developers, because a lot of them are just like, I'm building this game that kind of has this unknown end and unknown budget, and that's pretty dangerous. So it's not planning that your game is going to be below this poverty line. It's hopefully planning that it'll be above, but that you could make it if it was right on the cusp or even a little bit below. Is kind of I think should be a good goal.
All right.
Okay, well, I think we've officially run out of time, but I think Bart wants to give a couple of closing statements and just
Great.
thank you and letting you know what's sort of going on. So,
All right. Well, let me just thank Nathaniel and
Thank you.
Peter and Chris, wherever he may be.